Hello and welcome to the Bucketlister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today I am going to be chatting to you about Marrakech. And I've just returned from Marrakech. I've just come back from our whitewater rafting trip in Morocco. And we start and finish in Marrakech. And I just thought I would share with you today my best things to do whilst you're in Marrakech. Because, as I've said lots of times before now, I think Morocco itself offers the biggest culture shock for the shortest amount of air miles. And I say that because obviously, you know, from London, it's roughly around a 3-hour flight to get to Marrakech. Generally, you know, you can fly into other places in Morocco, but for the majority of flights and for cheap flights, especially from the UK, Marrakech seems to be the airport of choice. It does take you longer to get to places such as the Canary Islands and places like that, which is why I say, and I've been coined with the phrase now, that Marrakech does offer the biggest culture shock for the least amount of air miles. And I love Marrakech as a city. You know, obviously it is an Arab country, but you're also in North Africa, and you're also getting a lot of European influences as well now, which is why I think Morocco in Marrakech just gives you that complete and utter diversity when you arrive in the Red City. Now, so what I wanted to talk to you about today is what should you be doing whilst you are in Marrakech? And for all of our trips, like I say, we always start in Marrakech and generally we always finish in Marrakech. So generally you get a couple of days on a bucket list trip to explore Marrakech itself. So for example, you know, quite often we will aim to get a very early 6-7 a.m. flight from the UK, leaving to go to Morocco, to Marrakech, which will get us in around 10 o'clock in the morning. By the time you've done you've got your bag, you've gone through immigration. It's a 15-minute transfer to get into the center of Marrakech from the airport. You can be checked into your riad and then straight out to explore. And we'll start with that by saying that I think, you know, you should be looking to stay within the Medina, within the walled city itself. So you've got the old part of Marrakech, which is surrounded by the original wall, as they class as the Medina. And then obviously outside of the walled city is now the newer part of town, etc., which has more of a European influence to it. The hotels and everything are all outside of the Medina. But if you are going to stay inside the Medina, then you're going to be staying in a riad itself. And I think everybody should experience staying in a riad and staying inside the Medina, because it's just a lot easier to explore and see everything that I'm going to sort of suggest that you see today. A riad is generally a small, almost like guest house B&B, if you like. Generally, and obviously, with it being a Muslim country, you know, they believe that beauty is on the inside. And that's the same that you get with a riad. So it might be that, you know, you're walking down the street, there is a doorway there. It doesn't look anything particular. You end up with you'll have your riad signpost on the side and a large door. You open the door, and then that's where the beauty then comes in, and it kind of opens up generally into this central courtyard with rooms all the way around the outside, normally kind of, you know, 3-4 stories high. And, you know, some of the riads will have a swimming pool in the bottom of the riad. Some of them will be more basic. Generally, they will provide breakfast at a riad, but then for lunch and dinner, they generally, they might, some of the bigger ones might provide an evening menu, but many of them just provide breakfast in the morning. And a lot of them will not allow you to have, they certainly won't serve alcohol in the riad, but at the same time, they won't allow you to bring alcohol into the riad either. Traditionally in Marrakech, inside the Medina, inside the walls, alcohol originally wasn't allowed to be served. That has now changed over the years, and you can now find bars and restaurants within the Medina that do sell alcohol, but a lot of restaurants especially around the main square will still be alcohol-free restaurants, so you won't be able to get a drink at those restaurants. But so I would suggest staying in the Medina, staying in a souk, staying in a riad. And then that will give you the great opportunities to go out and explore the Medina itself. So what should you be doing whilst you are staying in Marrakech? Obviously, the first thing is the souks itself, or the local markets. Souk Saint-Laurent, if you like, is the Bond Street of Marrakech. It's in the central part of the Medina. When you go through there, it's lined with carpets, brass lanterns, leatherwork, spices, shoes, slippers. These are all things that you can go and get yourself whilst you're wandering through the souks. I always think that I want to kind of go and give these people a marketing lesson, because all the shops are kind of next to each other selling the same things. And I always think, why don't you spread yourselves out a little bit? Because, you've got a pottery shop next to a pottery shop, next to a pottery shop, next to an art shop, next to another art shop, next to another art shop. I don't quite understand why they do it, but, you'll find everything, you like in the souks itself. And for the souks, they have specialist kind of areas, like there'll be a blacksmith's alley. There'll be a wool dyeing section where they will dye all the wool and make all the scarves. Then there'll be a leather section as well, where it'll all be, they'll show you how they're making the leather and their color in the leather. So go and explore the souks, and it can be quite daunting once you enter into the souks, because they just carry on and on and on. And sometimes you're kind of like, I can't find my way back out. And quite often we will find people on our trips will have got lost exploring the souks. Now, there are signposts, and they will generally signpost you back to the main square. So keep an eye above your head, because there are signs there. But also as well, for not a lot of money, someone will walk you back out and take you back to where you need to get to. So if you do get properly lost, then, just ask someone, and they will expect a few dirhams for their time, but they will definitely show you back to where you need to get to. Now, obviously, in terms of Morocco and the souks, you do need to haggle with the traders in the souks. They kind of expect it, and you certainly won't regret it. Now, if you go into a lot of the shops on the outside of the souk, sort of nearer to the square, etc., some of those will have prices on things, and they will be a fixed priced shop, and you won't be able to haggle with those guys. But if there's no prices on anything, then just assume that you're going to need to haggle. My rule of thumb is always a third of the initial price. And so, if for example, they start at 100, I might start somewhere around 30 or 40 dirhams would be my starting price for that item. And that's generally where, like, for example, I've just come back. I needed to buy a handbag. They started at 800. I ended up paying 250 for it. So my first offer was 200. So I'd gone in at a quarter. And then I was we were sneaking up, and we managed to, in the end, get on to 250. But one thing I will say to people is, obviously, at the minute, from a pound to the Moroccan dirham, it's about 12.5, the exchange rate at the minute. Moroccan dirhams is a closed currency. You can't get them in the UK. You will need to get them when you get out here. Wherever you go and change your money, then they will all be offering the same rate. And I suggest bringing UK pounds to change. There's no point bringing euros in transferring it from pounds to euros to dirhams. Just bring UK pounds and change it in one of the many change shops that are around the Medina itself. So you can kind of work out how much things are. And one thing that I always say to people, no matter where you are in the world, is that, if you're happy to pay that price for it and that's what it's worth to you, then, you then don't really be ripped off. And you can't be ripped off if you're kind of happy to pay what that price is. So, for example, let's say you see a painting and, you will happily pay £30 for that painting. So you then know full well that you're going to be paying somewhere around 350, 400 dirhams for that painting. If you later find out that someone got it for 250 dirhams, then, you don't really necessarily need to feel like you've been done out of something, as long as you are happy paying what you paid it for. And also, sometimes I think, like, don't get into too much of an argument about haggling, and always have an understanding of how much it is you're haggling over. Because I remember once, like, I was actually in Nepal with a friend of mine, and he was haggling over something, and it was going on and on for ages. And in the end, it actually worked out that he was haggling over 50p, and they weren't moving. And in the end, I walked into the shop and I was like, Tony, you are literally arguing over 50p here. I'll give you the 50p so he can leave and move on. And he was like, oh, okay, have it. Like, it was. So always have a think about actually how much it is, that you're thinking about when you're haggling. So that's my first thing. That's the first place I would go to, would be to explore the souks. And I kind of like doing it in daylight. And then obviously then go and have a look later on in the evening. But I think it's always good to get your bearings when you get there in the daylight. Next place that I think you should explore, again, both in the daylight and then again in the evening, is the main square of Jama El Fani Square, which is right in the center. And it's a vast open square right in the heart of the Medina. And it's one of Marrakech's biggest attractions, and also actually now is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And during the day, it's fairly kind of quiet, and there's a few people milling about. But then in the evening, it kind of just goes crazy when all the food stores start to open and everyone goes and eats the street food, and you'll get people listening to music, and people will be storytelling. And so yeah, it's just one place that you kind of, there's the snake charmers there's henna artists all over the place, there's the monkeys, so there's the orange juice stands. Again, there's like 20 orange juice stands all next to each other, and it costs you about it will cost you, about 4 dirhams for an orange juice, which is about 33 pence to have a freshly squeezed orange juice as you're walking through the square. So that's definitely worth doing. And I think the one thing that I really love doing is actually getting up onto one of the rooftops in the evening and looking down on how crazy the square is and getting some photos of the square itself. And that brings me on to the third thing that you should do in Marrakech, and that is get a sunset picture of the mosque the main mosque itself. And there is a great building right on the corner of the square that allows you, it's an ice cream shop. And you can go up, and as long as you buy a drink on the rooftop, a soft drink, because they don't serve alcohol, but you can sit there and wait for the sunset. And it gives one of the most stunning photos. And of course, you've got the square getting busy, and you've got the sunset coming down as well. And it is just a great photo to have, in something that I think everybody should do on one of their evenings in Marrakech. We only had one evening option to do it, because the first night we were there, it was pouring with rain. So we definitely wouldn't have got a sunset photo on this last trip. But I have got plenty of lovely photos from that point, looking at the mosque, and also then looking over the square. Next thing on my list to do, which is still inside of the Medina, is the Bahia Palace, which Bahia Palace roughly translates to beautiful palace. And it was built late in the 19th century, and is now part of the epicenter of the city's culture. The decor in there is absolutely stunning. You've got high gilded ceilings, rooms filled with paintings, mosaics, stuccos, huge open water, huge gardens with fountains and everything to look over. And it is just one of the most loveliest places to have a wander around in the afternoon. And again, if you have the sunshine, it is just a wonderful place to look around. So I think that should definitely be on your list when you go there. Other places on your list would be to go and have a hammam. Now, there are plenty of different options for hammams whilst you're in Marrakech. A hammam is a public bathhouse. It's a Moroccan institution, and there'll be one in every neighborhood in Marrakech. But as well as hotels and spas will now have hammams for tourists to go and enjoy as well. A hammam generally is, you will have a female hammam and you will have a male hammam. But it's where the Moroccans will go for their weekly relaxing scrub. And they'll also use it as a social event to connect with family and friends whilst they're there. But, if you go and have a look at spas or hotels, a lot of them will offer the hammam, which is, and then you can get a massage after the hammam as well. So do a little bit of research, find a really nice hammam, check out some of the hotel ones. But yeah, that's one thing. Again, if you've had a relaxing trek in the desert or Mount Toubkal, come back, grab yourself a hammam and a massage to recover from your traveling. But that's another great thing to do whilst you are in Marrakech. And again, that can be done around the Medina as well. Another place that I really love to visit is the House of Photography, or Maison de la Photographie, as it would be over in Marrakech. Excuse my French pronunciation there. But it's a 3-story riad that's been turned into a gallery, which houses the most amazing Moroccan photography collection. And it literally documents the lifestyle and landscape of Morocco between kind of the 1870s and 1950s, I think it is. But it just shows you where Morocco has come from. There is also a rooftop cafe, and it's one of the highest in the Medina as well. So you get a really good view of the Medina itself. So if you've got a few hours to spare and you're looking for something else to do, then go and have a look at the House of Photography as well, which I think is a stunning museum to go and have a look round. Another place that should definitely be on your list if you are in Marrakech, this one is actually on the outskirts of Marrakech. And that is the Jardin Majorelle, which was created by the French painter Jacques Majorelle as a botanical garden. And it create you. If you've ever seen the indigo blue Art Deco house, that is the Jardin Majorelle. That's its centerpiece. And then basically when Jacques Majorelle died, nothing happened to it. And in the end, it was Yves Saint-Laurent that actually bought it and brought it back to life to the point that it is now. The gardens also have a Berber museum, which is really interesting, which showcases a collection of traditional Moroccan jewellery and fashion from the Berber people itself, and talks about Berber history. And also now as well, next door, they have built the Museum of Yves Saint-Laurent. Since he died, they've now built a museum dedicated to him and his career, spanning his 40-year career. So if you want to do both, you can pay to go into the gardens, you can add in the Berber Museum, and also as well, you can go next door and go into the Museum of Yves Saint-Laurent as well. Now, that's actually more in the newer part of Morocco. You can walk from the Medina. It's about a 40-minute walk to get from the Medina to the Jardin Majorelle. Or you can grab a taxi, or you can grab a horse and cart, or you can grab a tuk-tuk, depending on how brave you are. You used to be able to turn up to the gardens of Majorelle and just pay when you get in, but now you have to pre-book your space. So if you are now wanting to go and visit the gardens or any of that, you now need to pre-book. So make sure you do that before you head over, because the chances are when you get there, it will be fully booked. So do book that one in advance. Another place to go and see in the Medina is the Ben Youssef Madrasa de Ben Youssef, which was a Quranic learning school, was the largest teaching establishment in Morocco. Again, the craftsmanship, the architecture inside it is, there's ancient cedarwood ceilings, again, more stucco work, the carvings and the intricacy of what you see in there is just absolutely amazing. And one that, again, they've just done a big renovation of it. So, it was closed for a long time, but it's back open now, and definitely one to add to the list of things to do whilst you are in Marrakech. Obviously, there are also there is the more Western European side of Marrakech. And that is definitely worth a look to go and explore if you've got time. If you're there for longer, I mean, I imagine like what I've just gone through would take you 2 days to go through the things that I've already gone through. But if you are there for longer, then I definitely suggest go and have a look at the newer neighborhoods. They call it the new town. It has some lovely cafes. It has shopping malls. And it harbors more modern and contemporary art galleries, newer restaurants. So if those sorts of things are on your list, then you can head out and have a look at some of the newer things in Marrakech itself. The final thing that I think you should add to your list of things to do in Marrakech is to go to the tanneries. Obviously, Morocco and Marrakech is famous for its leather. And a visit to the tanneries is not one to go amiss. Again, they're outside, they're quite they're quite a distance away from the main square. So I would advise getting a horsing car or a tuk-tuk or a taxi to take you to the tanneries. You probably need about an hour and a half to wander around. The smell is pretty bad, as you would imagine. But you do get the most amazing photos if you can, take looking down at the tanneries and seeing all the dyeing happening of the leather. But it's definitely one to add to the list as well. Now, there are other things to do whilst you're in Marrakech that are kind of further away. So if you've got plenty of time, or maybe you've been to Marrakech before, and now you've done those things, and that's kind of where I'm now at, because I've sort of done, I've probably been to Marrakech 30 times now, and I've done those places. So, now I'm looking at other things to go and do. Now, a few people have gone and explored the Agafay Desert. That's becoming a lot more popular on our trips now. People are returning. They've already done the gardens. They've already been to the Bahia Palace. What else can I do? It's a short trip to the Agafay Desert. There you can do quad biking, camel riding. It kind of takes you into the beginnings of the desert. So that's one thing that's been added to quite a few people's lists is heading to the Agafay Desert. Another one that's a little bit further, but again, we experience it on our Sahara Desert trek, and we also experience it on our Best of Morocco trip. And that's a trip down to Eight Ben Haddou, which is the movie set that they used in Gladiators. They also used it in Aladdin. There's also the Atlas Film Studios down there. It's kind of a full day's excursion. But if you want to go and see that, then it is certainly worthwhile doing it. You kind of get to go over the high Atlas Mountains as well. So you kind of get a trip out to the Atlas Mountains as well as going to the film studios. Another day trip from Marrakech would be, to go to the high Atlas Mountains. If you weren't on a Mount Toubkal trip and you wanted to go and see the high Atlas, you could go to Imlil for the day and do a trek around Imlil. Again, like I said, you've got the Agafay if you want to go down towards the Sahara Desert and do a little bit of a desert trek or camel ride or quad bike ride. So you've got loads of options for things to do whilst you're in Marrakech. And those are kind of the things that I would suggest doing whilst you are there. There are plenty of other things as well, but I think within that list there, I've kind of ticked off the majority of them. And then the other ones that I would then say is to then look at finding some of the best places to eat and drink in the evenings. And, there are plenty of options of where you can eat and drink whilst you're in Marrakech, especially whilst you're in the Medina. But two that I love to visit every time, and I take my groups there all the time if I can, is La Salama restaurant in the main, just off the main square, and also Cabana is another amazing rooftop restaurant that I always struggled to get a table with, but luckily I managed to get a table for our group this time. And if you do want to go to Cabana, you do need to kind of book the day before you're planning on going. But it gives you a most amazing view of the main mosque in the center, lovely rooftop terrace to eat from. And the food is amazing as well. It's if you're kind of a little bit bored of tagine, then Cabana is a great option to go to. And I kind of generally use that one as my last stop, my last option for dinner whilst we're in Marrakech. So hopefully you have enjoyed this episode. It's given you some ideas of things to do whilst you are in Marrakech. There is plenty to see and do in Marrakech. And, I have only just scratched the surface, but having been there for around 30 times now, I've seen most things in Marrakech now. So I think my list is pretty good. But I will put a list of all of those things up with some information in the show notes to this podcast, and you can go back and have a look there. But hopefully you found this episode interesting, useful as well. But if you could do one thing for me and just go and hit subscribe and give a review for the podcast, that would be great, because the engines that promote the podcast certainly like it when people give us more 5-star reviews, and at the same time subscribe to it as well, because it just shows people that actually people like the podcast. So that would be great. But until next week, thank you ever so much for listening, and I'll catch you then. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.